Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Hernandez, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut General Assembly's Nonpartisan Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity. We are so honored today to be conducting a public conversation, a forum, on increasing and diversifying the educator workforce. You know, it's apparent to all of us that the crisis of teacher shortages isn't unique to Connecticut. It's one that we're experiencing not only in our state, but in our region, and in fact, across the nation. And there's another crisis that looms right next to it, which is the crisis of a lack of diversity among our educator cadre. And as those two questions come together, how do we populate our classrooms with quality instructors, and how do we diversify our classrooms so that they are enriched by that diversity, we find an opportunity. So today, I'm so proud to welcome two of our sister states, the state of Massachusetts and the state of Rhode Island, that have joined us today, and also representatives from our federal government who will be introduced shortly. But firstly, I welcome all of you. I'd like to firstly recognize our friend representing the Connecticut State Department of Education, Mary Glassman. Mary, I know that you come with a message from the commissioner, so welcome.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here on behalf of Education Commissioner Shirley Russell Tucker. She'd like to thank all of you for this important conversation, to welcome our guest speaker from the White House and our distinguished guests from our neighboring states, and also State Representative Porter and our other representatives. Connecticut has made diversifying our educator workforce a priority, and we all know that research shows that all children do better when they learn from a diverse workforce. I also wanted to thank Severa Gordon, Steve, and Warren Oyanadel, who serve on the Teacher Recruitment Council for the state of Connecticut, who are very familiar with the work we're doing and strong advocates for this work as well. We're proud of our efforts to offer scholarships, to be announcing a residency program to diversify the workforce, and we look forward to hearing how we can do more and must do more and work with our partners. So thank you for including us today.
Thank you so much for that, Mary, and thank you for all of your efforts. I think there are a set of shared values in really pursuing this work. And one of those shared values is a profound understanding that as we invite diversification of our teacher workforce in the state of Connecticut and beyond, it would be unethical if we don't address some of the outstanding issues that we've had with undervaluing our educational system writ large. We need to pay our teachers more, honor them as due, and make the profession as attractive as it should be for a new generation of teachers while taking care of the teachers that have been there all along. So with that, I'd like to introduce one of my friends and colleagues of this institution and beyond, Severa Gordon, the Executive Director of ConCan. Welcome, Severa.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Very few people could get me to come here on a Friday afternoon before a long weekend, but Stephen is one of those. So welcome to Connecticut's General Assembly, and welcome to a conversation on educator diversity. So here in Connecticut, you know, we've been talking about this probably for really long time. But starting in 2014, the legislature decided to make this a priority by creating the Educator Diversity Recruitment and Retention Task Force. And from there, a lot of really good work has been done. And some of that work we'll talk about today as the day goes on. Representative Porter chaired the first iteration of that task force. And for many years, we struggled to talk about, when we talked about increasing educator diversity, the first thing people would push back and say is you're lowering standards. And we spent a long time overcoming that message by saying, you know, the way teacher prep exists right now was created when the schools were desegregated and it got Black teachers out of the classroom. And we had to be real about that and talk about what the requirements were around getting more diverse educators, and the fact that we needed to make sure whatever requirements were there were connected to having high quality educators and not just checking a box because we said you needed to take this test, you needed to do this many years of schooling. And we really started to challenge the issue of who were the role models in our cities, who were the role models who could share their experiences with young people in the classroom. And we've done a ton of work, and there's just way too much has changed in the last, I would say, 8 or 9 years. But this year, what we're looking at is educator shortages. It's in the news, we keep talking about it. So we're working on an adjunct educator program for 9 through 12, where we're thinking about if you are in a teacher prep, if you're in a master's program, a PhD program, you have a bachelor's degree, and you are interested in teaching, we should be able to figure out how to get you into the classroom without you having to go back and get a master's degree. And you would be supervised by a certified educator, so it's not just a wild, wild west like we've heard in some other states. But we really believe if you think about giving back to your community, if you think about lots of people of color who are in professions and they'd love to figure out how they can be of service in their community, this is one way that we would like to create a pathway to getting them into the classroom. It's not law yet, we're working on it with the State Department of Education. And I also want to talk about Senator McCrory, who's been a friend and a partner in this work for many years. He's not here today, but he has been a leader, and we're really trying to figure out how can we fast-track qualified individuals who are pillars into the community to get them in front of young people. Because right now in Connecticut, there are schools in Bridgeport and other places where kids are being bused because there's no certified educator in the classroom. So that's just a little bit of what we're doing. I could talk forever about how great Connecticut is and what we're doing around teacher diversity, and really just thinking about modernizing the profession and making it work for the way kids learn today, and not this antiquated model of you gotta go to teacher prep for 6 years, you have to take all these tests, and really thinking about what do kids need. My son's in 6th grade, he has yet to have an educator of color. My daughter is in kindergarten. I hope we can change that trajectory for her so she can see herself in the classroom and think about this as something that she'd like to do. So welcome to Connecticut, and it's great to see all of you. I am going to introduce Alexis K. Holmes. Welcome to Connecticut. Alexis serves as the Executive Director of the White House Initiative on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity for Black Americans. Most recently, she served at the National Education Association as Policy Manager of the Education Policy and Implementation Center. Previously, she was responsible for advocating policies related to secondary schools, career and technical education, and family engagement, and led NEA's national outreach and engagement of the Black community. Prior to joining NEA, Alexis was Director of Federal Relations at College Board, where she worked closely with educators, institutions, community advocates, and civil rights allies to advance policies that support all students' aspirations at post-secondary success. Alexis is a graduate of West Virginia University School of Journalism with a focus on public relations and political science. Welcome to Connecticut.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. And I so appreciate your comments and that lovely introduction. And I want to express a very special thanks to all of our educators and students, maybe some future educators, families, and policymakers who are here and present during a special time and for a critical conversation. On behalf of U.S. Secretary of Education, Dr. Miguel Cardona, of course, he sends his best wishes and instructions for all of us to be bold, not only during today's discussion, but also in the actions that we commit to when we lead. And happy Black History Month, too. As was shared, I am Executive Director for the White House Initiative on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity for Black Americans, which we respectfully and affectionately will shorten for the rest of the conversation to the White House Black Initiative. On February 1st, the White House Black Initiative began Black History Month with the celebration of Black educator excellence. This year's theme for Black History Month is Black Resistance, and we could think of no better place to start this year's celebration than with Black educators, who for so many of us have fostered and laid a foundation for excellence, resilience, and a loving and very knowing accountability. This year was particularly moving because we held a historic fireside chat led by Secretary Cardona, with all of the living Black teachers who have been honored as National Teacher of the Year, which is 3. They are Kurt Russell, current National Teacher of the Year from Ohio, Rodney Robinson, 2019 National Teacher of the Year from Virginia, and of course, now U.S. Representative and recently elected Vice Ranking Member of the U.S. House Committee on Education and the Workforce, U.S. Representative Johanna Hayes, 2016 National Teacher of the Year from the great state of Connecticut. It's an honor to be here with you today to discuss the imperative of increasing and diversifying the educator workforce. Nationally, the stats in this area are real. More than half of our students nationwide are students of color, and yet fewer than 1 in 5 educators come from communities of color. And we know that research affirms the positive and impactful influence that educators of color can have on students of all backgrounds. Black teachers can reduce high school dropout rates by nearly 40% for Black students and increase the likelihood that they enroll in college. But Black teachers make up only 7% of our educator workforce. And 27% of public schools had multiple teaching vacancies as of last fall, concentrated in high poverty neighborhoods and schools with large portions of students of color. And that is why Secretary Cardona has led in the charge to diversify and bring respect to the education profession through a series of initiatives housed in his Raise the Bar agenda, which prioritizes, energizes, and resets the conversation in how we as an education community can transform how we recruit, retain, and support more educators of color. 2 days ago, the U.S. Department of Education announced the first ever awards totaling more than $18 million for the Augustus F. Hawkins Centers for Excellence program, which provides grants to minority-serving institutions to support and bolster their teacher preparation programs, contributing to the critical need to strengthen the diversity of our teacher pipeline and address teacher shortages, in addition to the ongoing federal efforts of supporting Grow Your Own programs and building on teacher-registered apprenticeship programs. For the White House Black Initiative, we are engaging with Black educators, community leaders, and institutions to build community in addressing how we bring and keep more educators of color in the classroom and on faculty. It's also worth noting that the White House Black Initiative is joined by 4 other White House initiatives in this effort. They include the White House Initiatives for Historically Black Colleges and Universities, the White House Initiatives for Hispanics, Native Americans, and Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. I have a little bit of additional background about the Black Initiative. The White House Black Initiative is actually the newest initiative created under President Barack Obama. And we currently have several programs in the works in addition to supporting educator diversity. We lead an interagency working group to leverage the resources of this administration and how it's supporting the educational and economic needs of the Black community. We hold regular Lunch and Learn series that explore a variety of issues that impact our students, families, and communities. And we're set to launch in the next few weeks a number of local events with our interagency partners to bring federal resources directly to communities, also including career fairs and town halls with students and families. And later in the year, we're looking forward to hosting literacy events across the country to bring more visibility to Black authors and their impactful stories. As we continue with today's program, it's also worth noting that today, February 17th, is National Random Acts of Kindness Day. And in our worlds, there's so much to do. Our plates are overflowing, Our inboxes have taken on lives of their own, and for some of us, we're depleted, physically and emotionally. And I think it's important to remember and to be intentional about being kind to you, because this is tough work. There is no one-size-fits-all answer, and it's work for the long haul. Which is why I so appreciate the words of Augustus Hawkins, who was the first Black politician elected to the U.S. House of Representatives from west of the Mississippi River, and a stalwart for education and for educators. And he said, "The leadership belongs not to the loudest, not to those who beat the drums or blow the trumpets, but to those who day in and day out, in all seasons, work for the practical realization of a better world. Those who have the stamina to persist and remain dedicated." I thank you for inviting me here, and I thank you for this moment, and I look forward to spending the rest of the day with all of you. Thank you.
Executive Director Holmes, thank you so much for sharing the legacy of your office and of course the evidence of all of the fine work that you're doing across the country. So much of what you're describing, that you're engaging across the country, is really inspirational to us because it's what we're trying to do here in the state of Connecticut as well. So thank you for all of your work, and thank you for being here with us today as we launch into our conversation. And it's only fitting that on Random Act of Kindness Day, thank you for bringing that to us, that I introduce the moderator for our next panel. Camilla Drummond-Forrester. Camilla Drummond-Forrester is the founder and principal consultant at KDRU Consulting LLC. She is a speaker, consultant, workshop presenter on topics such as social and emotional learning, educational equity, anti-racism, and self-care. Most recently, Camilla was the director of Open Circle, an SEL learning program for children in elementary schools. She is a board member of the State Social and Emotional Learning Advocacy Organization, SEL for MA. Some of you may know that we have an SEL for CT here in the state of Connecticut, and served as the first board chair for the newly formed national organization, SEL Providers Association. Camilla's passion for social justice and the social and emotional well-being of children fuels her commitment to advocating for and educating others about the inextricable connections between social and emotional learning, social justice, and anti-racism. Camilla, your full bio is in our program. Please have a look at her full bio. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I am thrilled to have been invited to moderate this very important discussion around diversifying the educator workforce, and I'm thrilled to be in such wonderful company with our panel, who you'll hear from momentarily. We have former educators here, we have education activists who are here, and folks who have built nonprofits to really focus in on what we're talking about, the retainment and recruitment of educators of color. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. I'll begin with introducing our first speaker, and that is Neil Patel. And Neil is a former educator, and he's currently attending Yale University School of Public Health, where he has been striving to learn more about the intersection of education and public health in order to find effective solutions that will set his students up for success. So, yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to first preface in saying that I'm here today to speak on behalf of my experiences. The reflections that I have may not exactly resonate with all, but I am confident in the fact that my experience highlight the roots of the issues that I have faced alongside many of my other coworkers and other teachers across the country. Additionally, I also want to ensure that my experience should not be used as a token for understanding the current status quo for credit education. There are a wide array of experiences, and many of my fellow members on this forum can definitely speak to that as well. When you look at me today, what do you see? You all likely come to similar conclusions. Maybe a successful, educated person of color who is an advocate for change, who deeply cares about the state of education in this country. But then you start to wonder, who is he? Where is he from? What is his background? You try to put all the puzzle pieces together, starting with those outside pieces, those corner pieces, those side pieces. But here's the thing. You'll never get to see the full picture. Because all the things that I am are attributed to my community. And to put the puzzle pieces together would be to understand the impact that my community has had on me. And the people who have invested in me. Just as you construct that picture of who I am now, so too did I have to figure out each of these puzzles for the 500 plus students that I've served in my middle school. And just the same, I've learned of the power of the community's impact on my students. Before I begin this story, this is about one of my students that I've taught in the past. One of the students I taught was Jaden Battles. He was a short, stout, 13-year-old black boy with a happy-go-lucky attitude. Always had this continuous grin, the one that made you wonder and always ask, what are you up to? What are you doing? He had a passion for middle school orchestra. He also had this passion to draw comic books. He'd draw these mini comic books in class. Jaden loved school, which was a refreshing attitude for a 13-year-old. Many of my students didn't have that same feeling at 8 a.m. in the morning, right? This is the Jaden I saw almost for an entire semester. But then you begin to peel back the layers. You get to discover some of those pieces. So as I learned more, I learned that Jaden was a special education student at a 4th grade math level. But in partnership with his mother, we were able to create a tutoring plan for him after school in order to bridge that gap and get him up to speed. On one Wednesday, after one of our tutoring sessions, Jaden had called home from my phone, as he always does, to be picked up. But this time, his 5-year-old brother answered. Mom isn't here. Mom is on the ground. She's not waking up. Jaden looked up in shock, completely distraught, unlike any of the reactions I've seen before in class. His eyes widened as he said, I think my mom's having a diabetic attack. I called 911 and asked for his address. He didn't know it. He did know the route that he walked home every day, so we rushed to my car. We drove the path to his family's apartment. As we walked inside, we were hit kind of with this smell, and I found Jaden's mom passed out on the floor in the kitchen. She had used, I think, like a trash can to kind of catch her fall. She was unconscious. I grabbed some juice from the fridge, and in stepped Jaden told Jaden to bring me any piece of mail that they had so I could call 911. Relay the address to emergency services. Paramedics arrived and were able to provide enough support, load her into the ambulance with Jaden and his brother alongside. I went home that night, exhausted from the day of teaching, from dealing with the situation, and I had more questions than I had answers. Did she take her insulin incorrectly? Had this happened before? Why was she put in this position in the first place? But I had to go into work the next day and pretend like nothing happened in order to continue to show up for my kids. It has been 3.5 years since I've left the classroom. and I'm still feeling and processing the effects of my experience with Jaden, one of these puzzles, alongside many other students. I've come to realize that as I put those puzzle pieces together for each of my students, there are a lot of gaps that they're handed, difficult circumstances, no fault of their own. And you begin to learn about the inequities that exist within their communities and the systems and structures that have played a role. Would it have been possible to build a support system for Jaden's mom, even at the school? Could there have been a check-in? I don't know. Is it my responsibility? How much is my responsibility? Could we build or incorporate other things to support our students? I so quickly focused on all of the solutions that I forgot I needed to take a second for myself. The emotional toll of teaching built up for me. After my 2 years of teaching, I was burnt out. Not only did I feel mentally drained, I just didn't have anything else left. Did I have support? There were people there. But did I truly feel supported? Did I feel listened to? I don't know. For me, the multiple roles that I had to play, teacher, counselor, coach, you name it, they simply stretched me too thin. And moreover, it felt like it was just an unsustainable path. As a first-generation immigrant, and trying to build a family, a future for myself, I decided that I had to take a step away. I want to end by saying that as we dream together in redefining our education system, I hope we truly center the teacher experience. There are things that happen beyond the four walls of the classroom, but they do show up in those four walls. So as we, again, dream together in redefining our education system, I hope we truly focus on the community and we build the systems and structures to retain our teachers and incorporate their input. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to my story. That's all.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And I think it elevates what many of us who've been in the education field, whether as classroom teachers, administrators, or simply consultants like myself supporting teachers have seen throughout the country, really. Just this immense burden sometimes, this emotional burden that some of our educators are facing and holding in the midst of being evaluated for what they're teaching in class and how they're performing. And I think as we continue along with our panel, we'll hear some more conversation about what are some of the ways that we can interrupt that, right? We can't do self-care in a silo. Self-care is very much rooted in community care. And I think, Neil, your story and what you shared really elevates that, so thank you so much. Next, we will hear from Saida Ray Fisher, who is an educator, author, and education advocate. She is currently a K-8 district literacy coach in Hartford Public Schools and Vice President of Special Projects on the Hartford Federation of Teachers Executive Board.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here to talk and discuss about this very important issue that's been something very passionate issue of mine that I've researched for years. I wanted to start by clearly and explicitly stating the problem, which is retaining and diversifying the educator workforce. So I want to make sure there's no question about that. I wanted to to start everyone off with some data. The orange represents educators of color, which includes anyone who does not identify as white. This is for the state of Connecticut, which is where I'm from. This information is from the Ed site, so anyone can look this up. This is a visual of how the gap is still increasing here with a slight increase over 5 years. We've been working at it. When I first looked at research this data, we were at 8% and now we're at 10.6% as a state. But this increase does not match the rate of growth of our population of diverse students. As you can see, the contrast between the educators of color in blue and in orange, and then the students of color in blue. And then this is from my particular district, Hartford. We have 27.8% educators of color in my district, and same, it's increasing over the past 5 years, but again, not at the rate of our diverse population of students. Now, I wanted to take this opportunity to express some of the barriers that teachers themselves, after doing some quantitative and qualitative data, here are some feedback from teachers as to why they feel barriers exist in our district and in Connecticut. Passing state requirements, getting through the hiring process, support. You can get that in the classrooms too. That would be great. Between states and countries for credentialing, tuition for education programs as colleges and universities, and then salaries. So in terms of passing state requirements, I know like in my role, I came here initially as a Teach for America teacher in 2007, and there were colleagues of mine who were not able to teach in Hartford or in Connecticut because they didn't meet the standards, but their scores were passing in other neighboring states, and so they had to leave, so we lost them in terms of that. Getting through the hiring process, I've spoken to educators of color who said they've attended fairs, minority teacher recruitment fairs, and then they thought everything was going great, but then when it came back to get a call for an interview, they never heard anything else. In terms of countries, you're going to hear a little bit more about that in the post I'm going to show you soon. And then in terms of tuition, just with educators or people of color not being able to just reconcile with how are they going to pay for student loans when they don't have that generational wealth or that family financial support to afford to these teacher programs. And then barriers to retaining, lack of advancement opportunities for qualified teachers of color, discrimination in forms of microaggressions, unfair assumptions, preferential treatment. I'll just let you read the rest of those. So I really wanted to take this time to honor everyday diverse teachers on the front line in front of our students, to give them this breath through this forum and to hear through their own words reasons why they are leaving the profession. I feel like I am pitted against my white colleagues in a way that is not conducive to a positive school culture. Sometimes unfair assumptions are made about Black teachers that are counterproductive to us working together as a team and building a positive work environment. The credentials from my country are not considered adequate. I have to basically do everything all over again, and it is a deterrent. It doesn't feel good being the only Black teacher in my school. My colleagues can miss a staff meeting and go unnoticed, but if I'm just 1 minute late, everyone is wondering where the Black teacher is. It's a different standard for us. At professional developments for the district, when we are instructed to work in small groups, I often experience microaggressions that question my understanding of content. As a young educator, I had colleagues within my school question my certification. I've observed a dominant oppressive culture when it comes to policing students that many colleagues of color, including myself, disagree with. I have little to no recourse if an admin misrepresents information or evaluations of me due to unconscious or conscious bias. I'm the only educator of color and I'm not in the know for everything that happens in the school. I'm purposely left out of some emails and anything social. Mindsets towards educators of color are that we are not as valuable. This can create an imposter syndrome and feelings like we are not good enough to be here. I don't want to be a part of a system where I repeat the same traumas inflicted on me when I was a young Black student in a systemically racist system. There is a disconnect with mutually respecting cultures. We are expected to assimilate instead of respecting the identity I own and am proud of. I'm often faced with more than my share of student discipline problems. Since I handle them well, they are disproportionately placed in my classrooms. The few that my white colleagues do have are also in my classroom for time out. I spend a lot of time on preventative measures and redirecting behaviors, while my colleagues are allowed to just teach. It is emotionally consuming and unfair. Scripted curricula that my students have trouble identifying with because we are told that we can't deviate from it, it makes it difficult to differentiate for my students who are mostly Latina. Also, I am taken away from my classroom all the time to translate. I would rather be teaching. They need to hire translators for schools. Lack of exposure to veteran mentors of color. Also, there are very few people who look like me when I attend professional development. This immediately places me in a position where others assign me the role of representative of my entire race. And then this is the last quote. During my lunch break, and while students were at lunch themselves, a white teacher reported me because I was listening to gospel when she entered my room. Even the way I choose to reset during the day, during my duty-free time, in my own room is judged in my image. Just want to take like 10 seconds for some of that to sink in. There were three effective ways in research that we found that worked towards diversifying the workforce. This was led by 2 interns at Trinity College, just in trying to work with my classroom to my colleague, which was an HFT initiative, Teacher Pipeline Programs, Legislature, and Union Contracts. So these are just 4 bullets here of the many ways that we've tried in Connecticut to address this problem, but these were some that directly impacted teachers in Hartford, or they got to participate in. So lowering the passing score for certifications so that it was more equitable or in line with other neighboring states. Minority teacher recruitment fairs and ARCH programs, alternative route to certification. And then the HFT's initiative for my classroom to my colleague. And then E4E members had written policy papers and lobbied for legislature as well. Those are some of the ones that impacted Hartford. And then I just wanted to uplift something that we were doing in Hartford. Paso a Paso program started this year in Hartford, and then Caribbean Connection program will begin next year in Hartford. And this was a program where we were recruiting bilingual teachers from Puerto Rico to come in and work. Those are our 2 greatest populations in Hartford, the West Indian population and the Hispanic population. And some of this was done with, we're trying to make sure that we are doing this with the community, with the union and just have partnerships in order for this to be effective. With the Paso a Paso program and the Caribbean connection, they have signing bonuses, moving stipends, housing security deposits, assistance with Connecticut certifications, school-based mentors, and then membership into associations, and then additional deposits if they're living in Hartford and serving in Hartford. We don't have the results yet of this, but we'll get back to you on that. And that.
Thanks so much, Sarita, for sharing this data and the numbers and also the qualitative research. As someone who came out of a research college when I was doing open circles, sometimes there is a hyper-focus on the quantitative. And although that is important, the qualitative is as equally as important. So bringing those educator of colors, their voices into the room was potent and profound, and also elevates the fact that when we think about retainment and recruitment, there is no get around in terms of thinking about dismantling systems of oppression. That is the through line. That is part of how we recruit and retain. And I think, the voices that you lifted in your presentation really highlighted that, so thank you so much. Next, we will hear from Devin Morris, who is the co-founder and executive director of the Teachers Lounge. It's a nonprofit organization in Massachusetts whose mission is to recruit, revitalize, and retain educators of color throughout the greater Boston area and beyond. Outside of co-founding the Teachers Lounge, Devin sits on several local and national coalitions supporting diversification of the teacher workforce in support of all students. Devin?
Thank you, Camille. And thank you for the introduction and for the invitation. Thank you to Denise as well. Thank you all for being here. The work you are doing, the intentions you're setting, and the journey you're going on together. Before we get started, this camera is not going to catch the number of supporters who are in this space. And I very much do not like talking at people for a very long time, so I'm going to say good afternoon, and if you could just let me know you are alive and well. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Excellent. You're going to hear some things from me, and if you have not already, you will hear it from others on this panel today. I think the way in which you advocate beyond your presence in this building right now is if you hear something that resonates, you can go to church a little bit. So you can say, that's right. Something to let folks that are decision makers in this space know that this is resonating with you, also guide some of the decisions that they make. So I just want to give that precursor. So today I'm going to focus my talking points on the collection and use of data as a retention strategy towards diversifying our educator workforce, centering the lived experiences of educators of color who have already chosen the profession in our respective schools and districts. I think it's first important to really briefly share a bit about the work that we do at the Teachers Lounge for context. And so TTL was co-founded back in 2018 by myself and then business partner Jabari Petty. We were two New York City transplants and school leaders seeking to build community outside of our respective workspaces and increase the diversity of our respective talent pools at the schools where we were school leaders. And we were sick of folks saying to us that educators of color just aren't out there. It was not true then, it is not true now. People told me I was crazy when I said that we were out there, we just didn't have a home base, a watering hole, or a teacher's lounge to pull up to. People also told me I was crazy to think that we could create this in Boston of all places and then get educators of color to pull up to a work event on a Saturday nonetheless. And as I like to joke, this was our first Usher watch this month. But it was not our last. That might have gone over some of your heads, but I'll come back and do a session afterwards. It's all right. And so our bottom line is students. We seek to drive unprecedented student outcomes by greatly diversifying the people, thoughts, and actions of the educator workforce in the greater Boston area and beyond. And we do this by recruiting, revitalizing, and retaining educators of color. I just want to highlight for you all, we're going to talk about these 3 levers as it relates to our theory of change in a bit. I want to highlight what we mean by revitalize. This is recharging our passion, our energy, and purpose in education through community. And so, what this looks like. We have 5 core components. The first, there we go. Educators of color from across the Commonwealth join a community that affirms the rich diversity of experiences, backgrounds, and rarely reflected in our schools at present. In addition to the panels, workshops, and professional development for educators of color, schools, organizations, and community partners are supported in developing and implementing equity-centered hiring and retention strategies. Through our Classroom Leaders of Color Fellowship, or CLOC Fellowship, we seek to turn early career educators of color into veteran educators of color with the proper coaching and mentorship that is currently lacking in our school systems, and by pairing them with veteran educators of color until our schools better reflect and have more rich diversity of veteran educators of color. We engage in research, analysis, consultation, and synthesis of information rooted in the lived experiences of educators of color to produce new ideas and practical approaches to promoting equity in our education system in an attempt to build stronger recruitment pathways and retention strategies for educators of color. And last but certainly not least, educators of color are connected with other educators of color and hiring managers from our close to 200 school and district partners to gain access to new resources and opportunities and develop sustainable relationships as opposed to the opportunistic ones that tend to show themselves right around this time around hiring season. And so candidates of color and hiring managers gain access to a job portal and a virtual hiring fair where educators of color are in the driver's seats of our career exploration experience. This image on the right is just an image of one of our convenings earlier this year, and then you can look at some numbers of how we fared when we had to go hybrid or virtual during the pandemic. Okay, so I want to zoom out just a bit. We can't cover everything today in such a short amount of time. But it's important to note that what this work looks like when we zoom out, so you understand 2 things. You understand when I'm focused on one piece of the puzzle today that you don't think that I skip steps, and more importantly, that I'm not telling you that it's okay to skip steps. So, what we're about to cover has been affirmed by and adapted from the Massachusetts State Department of Education and TNTP's Promising Recruitment, Selection, and Retention Strategies Guidebook. If you're not familiar, we'll share the link with folks. So when you zoom out, what does this look like? Creating and sustaining diversity, equity, and inclusion in schools requires anti-racist leadership. There's no way around it. It does not require perfection or that you know everything. But before we can talk about increasing representation of educators of color, we need leadership that is ready to create a supportive environment that's welcoming, inclusive, affirming, and committed to our development and sustainability. Really great resource and shameless plug for a very close friend and colleague is there's a book called Change the Narrative, How to Foster an Anti-Racist Culture in Your School, written by some Massachusetts educators, Kathy Lopes and Henry Turner, who are working in Newton Public Schools in Massachusetts. It also requires that you've completed an interrogation of your why. Why diversity matters to you, to your students, to your families, and to your staff. Why you do this work and why others should join you in your process. I'm going to come back to this point, but it's important to note the data is now extensive on the impact on students of diversifying our teacher workforce. But I'd be curious to hear how many of us have talking points on how diversifying our workforce benefits our staff. And how comfortable we are saying to our white colleagues who choose a taxing and demanding profession each and every day that this is not an attack on them or what they bring to the profession. That's a session in and of itself. We're not going into all of that today, but I just need to make sure that we do note that. And that we have done some work to consider what deposits that we're making in support of educators of color who continue to choose our district, okay? Before we can ask anything of educators of color to do this work and to join us in developing short-term and long-term strategies towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to consider what deposits are we making in support of the sustainability of educators of color who have already chosen the profession and chosen our schools and chosen our districts. We have to consider how we create access to visible and actionable data. I'm going to focus a main portion of today's discussion on this topic as it relates to disrupting power dynamics and centering data and the lived experiences of educators of color. And that we use this data in an attempt to set SMARTY recruitment and retention goals and strategies. SMARTY stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based, inclusive, and equitable. What gets measured matters. And as you develop a framework for addressing equity, you have to also find ways to measure, quantify, and report on this impact and work. Clear goals and benchmarks, however small, will keep your district aligned and motivated along the way. It's eye-opening to think about the number of schools and districts that we work with and the conversations we enter into where they have not developed comprehensive recruitment and retention goals and levers. And further, if they have, how often they're lacking inclusivity and equity. We personally add one more eye to the mix, which is about innovation to ensure that we're not doing more of the same and not just checking boxes. So with this, let's take a little bit deeper dive on our why and how we collect data. So, assuming that you've taken time to develop your why, this is the right first step, but your why is only one side of the story. I like to think of this as intention versus impact. Your why is simply what your intentions are. We need to know what the impact of your intentions are on our stakeholders, particularly our students and staff of color. So many of you are probably familiar with iceberg analogies, right? There's more beneath the surface than meets the eye. I like to use the water lily analogy. I think there are clear distinctions on the components of your why. And so the first is the soil. This is what you believe, what are your core values, why you do the work that you do, the goals you hope to achieve. This is your foundation. And then we've got the vine, which also sits beneath the surface, but this is what you do, the work you do that you put in to achieve the goals that you set and to live out your why. Both of these things live beneath the surface and may not always be visible to those who you are seeking to serve and impact, okay? And then we have this beautiful flower that sits above the surface. This is what people see and say about the work that you are doing, what consistent messages live on the lips of students, staff, and families. Now, we know that these three tiers do not always line up, which maybe you may expect, but what you believe and what you do may not be what people are talking about, and it may not be what they see at all. The real question here is, do your beliefs and vision and execution of the work held, do they hold consistent amongst your leadership team, in your hiring practices, in your retention strategies, throughout the materials that you share with prospective educators, on the lips of current students, families, and educators who we want to spread the good word about the work that you are doing in your school or district. And this gets at the foundation of our theory of change. I'm only going to talk about a portion of this, so anyone who wants to geek out on our full scope of theory of change, happy to do so. But we have a bigger retention problem than a recruitment one. I think we know this. So we can't start with recruitment. Educators of color are leaving the profession at a clip 24% higher than our white counterparts. We can't make recruitment strides until we've properly addressed retention woes. But too often, after we achieve our recruitment goals, assuming that we've set them, there's no follow-on support or strategy or accountability provided to school leaders to attain those retention goals. That coach the coach and train the trainer. And strategies aren't set using the lived experiences of the educators of color who have chosen the profession. And so our adjustment here is that we think about the ways in which we can reignite the flame and the passion for the work, particularly in our educators of color. That's the revitalization. And we differentiate this from retention because often when you all are talking about retention, you're talking about at your schools or at your district. I hate to say it, I don't care if educators of color stay at your school. We care whether or not they stay in the profession and whether or not they stay in the state. And what we've learned over the past couple of years is just because I stay this year doesn't mean that the match is lit, and it doesn't mean that I'm staying for long at your school or in your district. And so how do we do this? When we retain and revitalize folks, particularly educators of color, they become recruitment assets and champions of our schools. Think back to the water lily analogy. What are people seeing and saying about the work that you do? And so educators of color who are revitalized become recruitment assets for external folks outside of your school and districts. That's short-term pipeline development. And to our students of color. And that's long-term pipeline development. So think about this. For every overworked and undervalued and underappreciated educator of color that students of color interact with, we've broken the pipeline. Why would they ever consider this a viable profession? So the reality is that folks leave. Educators leave for new opportunities that your school or district can't offer to them. But what are educators of color saying on their way out? If I've been supported, developed, and revitalized, even if there's a new opportunity in another school or district, on my way out, I'm going to hold the door open and tell folks that you should come here. You will be cared for, you will thrive in this role, but you should be here. And if that's not my experience, I'm going to say the same thing on my way out. I'm going to say, don't come here. So this is where that equity-centered data collection comes into play. But first, there we go. So we are, in the interest of time, we're not going to go through this equity pause. If you have a cell phone, you want to take a picture, please take out your phones now. We're not going to do this in real time, but I encourage our school and district leaders to go through this exercise and take this equity pause of interrogating your why. And thinking about these critical questions amongst your teams. What is it that we believe? What is it we do? And what is it that we think people are seeing and saying? And then go out and actually ask folks what it is that they are seeing and saying. Okay, so in many cases we know where we want to go, but how did we arrive to this conclusion? And does everyone agree with both the destination and the path toward it? How did we decide? The decisions have to be rooted in representation. And in order for us to tap into educators of color as recruitment and retention champions, the lived experiences of educators of color need to be documented and incorporated into strategies moving forward. And educators of color need to be part of each stage of recruitment, selection, and retention processes. Nothing about us without us is for us. But we have to avoid opportunistic and transactional exchanges. And so this looks like only reaching out to educators of color when it's time to fill out a survey, when it's time to join you at a hiring fair, or do outreach to their community of educators of color. Now, here's the tricky part. While avoiding the transactional nature of doing this work, I'll also say in the same breath, properly compensate folks for their efforts and for their expertise and for their lived experiences. Consider the deposits that you've made and are actively making for educators of color. Think back to your why before you ask anything of us. Okay. Before we can decide where we're going to go or how to get there, we have to assess where we've been and how we know this, which is where I want to wrap things up for us this morning, discussing the inequities of data collection. So we've been doing equity audits for schools and districts for a couple of years now, and we came across a resource that both affirmed and expanded our thinking about how we collect data. An organization by the name of Chicago Beyond developed a guidebook that can also be shared, I'm sure, Denise, with folks at the conclusion of this, called Why Am I Always Being Researched? The guidebook deals with 7 inequities held in place by power and calls out how they get in the way of truth and impact. There are 2 major findings here in this research. If evidence matters, we have to care about how it gets made. And the power dynamic between community organizations, researchers, and funders blocks information that could drive better decision-making and fuel more investment in communities most in need. Now, this research and guidebook is for community organizations, researchers, and funders, but it applies so profoundly to the work we do in education, and in this case specifically on how we're seeking to change the dynamics and systems that are preventing us from retaining a diverse educator workforce. So the guidebook focuses on 7 inequities. Those are access, information, validity, ownership, value, accountability, and authorship. When we do deep dives with schools and districts, we cover all 7. In the interest of time today, we're just going to focus on 4, which are information, ownership, accountability, and authorship. So, at this point, we know it's important to invite diverse and representative stakeholders to the table. But when we talk about information, what information has been provided to those at the table? When one party does not have full information, it's difficult to partner effectively or to get the full truth. We have to share all necessary information with those seated at the table, and this includes context, historical data, for example. This may reveal some harsh realities about harm done in the past. But we can't possibly make progress if we don't grapple with those harsh truths and where we've been. And we can't develop real trust with stakeholders if we withhold information or if we put up red tape around what we can and can't share. When we talk about ownership, it's important to ask the questions, who has the final say and who has access to the final product? Without shared ownership, the process of research can take from rather than build up your current collective of educators of color. And the inputs and answers that we get are incomplete. Nothing about us without us is for us. And so it's essential that you invite educators of color to co-ownership of research and decision making if we're to be invested in and trusting of the process and outcomes. Oftentimes we're invited to be a part of these processes but don't have ownership. Okay? And so we often see critical decisions about how the study operates, what we measure, how study tools are developed, and what participants experience because we don't feel like we have an equal ownership in the research itself. And so it's equally important to ask who's owning how the data collection is framed, by whom, is there a history of harm, inactivity, or lack of communication following the surveys that we conduct? Who crafted the questions? What's the experience of those being questioned? And what are the types of ways in which we are collecting data? Is it all surveys? Is it emphasis on the written word exclusively? Accountability. Who bears the burden of responsibility when the research or plan doesn't work, unintentionally creates harm, or was decided to not be acted upon? It is imperative to identify and mitigate risks to your school and to your stakeholders, but it's equally, if not more important, to own your role in any missteps. Here's the kicker. With true and representative co-ownership, the impact of potential missteps that will happen. This happens in research, it happens in strategy development. But if there's true and representative co-ownership in that process, the impact of those potential missteps will be received with more grace because of who was seated at that table and who was a part of the co-ownership of each step of the process. And as noted earlier, ownership is not just about in the final product. You have to look at who analyzes the data and the meaning behind the data. Don't just survey stakeholders, invite them to synthesize and interpret the data and make some decisions. Here's what we heard. Here's what we think it means. Is this correct? And this is both at the early stages and after you've made the decision to make sure that there's accountability of it as well. In tackling these inequities in data collection, you allow for a journey towards and a destination of authentic truth. This is the only way that we can and should create our short-term and long-term strategies rooted in the lived experiences of educators of color. That is what's going to make a difference. And as we know of equity and anti-racism work, these processes are iterative and never actually end. We learn, we grow, we reflect, wash, rinse, repeat. But we do so in true partnership. I'm going to include my information. We don't have time for questions right here, but we will have some time for questions in a bit. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Devin. So much that we could unpack from your presentation. But the few things that I wanted to elevate was nothing about us without us is for us. And the importance of a relationship-based and equity-centered approach to this work. Many of the things that you've highlighted that your organization is doing around affirming educators of color who are currently in the, classroom, having these affinity spaces, these mentorship programs, having these social spaces for educators of color just to be and be together. That affirmation, that identity affirmation, that affinity space, all of those things are so important. Highlighting some of the things you said around the equity-centered data, and that this is not just a transactional experience, and so many of us experience that, within our school systems and districts. Oh, why don't you, I remember when I was getting my my master's degree, I was the only person of color in the program, and they wanted to take a picture so they could put it on the cover of their booklet. They still got that picture. It's been a while, guys. So, this has to be relationship-centered, and there's no getting around that. And being in a relationship with other human beings takes work. It's not easy. You gotta own your stuff. You gotta be able to be in conversation. You gotta be able to do some truth-telling. I think that's what we're talking about here. That's another component of this work is how are we going to be in true, authentic, genuine relationship with educators of color in a way that is affirming and supporting. So thank you so much. Last but certainly not least, Ayanna Batts is next up, and she's the program manager at the Equity Institute in Rhode Island. This is an organization that develops and implements innovative solutions for building more diverse, equitable, and inclusive learning and professional environments. Ayanna is a lifelong resident of Rhode Island and a certified elementary special educator. Welcome, Ayanna.
Thank you so much, Camilla. And good afternoon. Thank you. I echo what my panelists here, that we are here in the building and we want folks to know it. So as Camilla said, my name is Ayanna Bass, and I have the pleasure of being on this panel with these esteemed folks. And I just want to say thank you to Neil for your vulnerability today and sharing your story and your truth. Also to Sai for highlighting what's happening in Connecticut, because I think it's important. We're often talking about what's not happening as people try to center the importance of growth and growth mindsets in the work. I think it's an important framing. So thank you for sharing the voices of those educators as well. And to Devin, I have the pleasure of actually knowing Devin. We are in neighboring states, yes, in Rhode Island, but my Chief Impact Officer, Carlin Howard, happens to be in fellowship with Devin, and it's been a pleasure it was a pleasure to know that he was going to be here, and now I have to follow him, so I don't know. But I'm here really to talk about our Educator Pathway program in Rhode Island. We've heard a lot about some of the challenges and potential solutions, but we actually are in the process of creating and flourishing in the state of Rhode Island around this Educator Pathway program. It is called TA to BA, and we really think about this each one, teach one model. At Equity Institute, let's see if this is going to in fact work. We actually focus on 4 pillars, being our virtual learning labs, which Our virtual learning labs working with districts. We also focus on our teacher educator pathway. We also do some root cause equity analysis work with districts and community organizations, and really thinking about how do we help them ask their why, right? I think that's really an important part of the growth process. And these are my colleagues, the equity architects at the Equity Institute, and we've become quickly a leading organization in the state for guiding schools and school systems to cultivate culturally responsive school and communities. And that's for all learners of all ages, right? And so we know that by impacting the teacher workforce, there's direct impact on our young leaders. So in general, what we do is we recruit, develop, support, and retain a more racially, linguistic, and ethnically diverse teacher workforce. We are really focusing on giving more students of color the experience of being taught by a teacher with similar backgrounds. Our goal is to improve career choices and income for professionals from historically underrepresented communities working in education already. And we really want to focus on developing a new generation of education leaders. If we're not doing this, we are only contributing to the problem, right? We have to continue to uplift folks in the field. So, with that being said, representation matters, right? In Rhode Island, more than 80% of students in the core cities identify as Black, Indigenous people of color, while less than 20% of the teachers identify as the same. Now, we've heard that from pretty much everybody here on the panel. Y'all have been reading probably in many literature, pieces of literature that are out in the field. And this Du Boisian-inspired image really just I want you to capture really what that looks like, right? So we have the white educators on the left, Black educators on the right in that top row. We have white students on the left in that center, and this is in Providence. I should be specific in naming that it is one of the largest districts in our state. And then the students of color, right? But what we want to do is look at the non-teaching staff in the district, which is what we've done, and think about that central piece there, those teaching assistants. How do we support them? As a special educator, I went through a traditional program. I was a non-traditional student. I graduated at 39 with my bachelor's degree and my certification, but it took me forever. I was a mom of 2 kids. I was trying to figure out how do I pay my mortgage while not having to quit my job. But that was an expectation in my program, right? So what problems are we trying to solve here for folks who are in the field? I saw countless numbers of teaching assistants and paraprofessionals who shined, just shined, and they were doing the work with our babies. But there were too many barriers in the way. So I was able to do some research in my undergrad program, actually in Providence, and thinking about what are those barriers, how do we try to get folks through the process. I ended up at the Equity Institute as a result. So I literally went research to practice, right? So it's been a really fulfilling opportunity to think about these problems and then be part of the solution. The research is clear. Increasing teacher diversity within schools creates higher expectations, lower discipline referral rates, better academic results for all students, all learners of all ages. I appreciate what you said about, what does having educators of color do for adults in the space. We're all learners still. And if you're not a lifelong learner, I ask you to question yourself about that why, because this is part of the process in our growth. Navigating the teacher certification process is challenging, and even many experienced community members that seek to grow into teacher roles, they just can't, right? That you go on the website and sometimes you just can't find what you're looking for. You make a phone call on your lunch break, 15 minutes is up. I didn't get anybody, now what? And are we actually thinking about how, again, these points and access points are going to hinder folks from moving on to those teaching credential possibilities? The last problem is really thinking about limited accessibility opportunities for adult learners. They are working individuals. As I said, my story was no different, except I thankfully had support from my family. We need to think about accommodating the needs of people juggling multiple responsibilities who have already gained significant relevant work experience. Right now, we have, I'm trying to think, at least 2 people that I can think off the top of my head that have more than 25 years of experience in the school system, and they're still paraprofessionals. They can't leave their jobs to attend school full-time. So, we created a solution. We provide access to and support the completion of a bachelor's degree, so that's one of the first barriers, right? Can't get your certification without that. And we advance folks with this through the value of that bachelor's degree. There's some Rhode Island statistics, very specific about the fact that less than 30% of working age adults have obtained their bachelor's degrees. And this includes the 120,000 Rhode Islanders over 25 with some college but no degree. Again, we think about these challenges and these barriers to completion, right? Nationally, bachelor's degree holders earn about $32,000 more annually than those whose highest degree is a high school education. And so when, again, we think about disparities, the fact that a paraprofessional or teaching assistant can't advance in the field, that means that they're being subjected to these consistent systemic oppression practices. They can't grow if we don't give them opportunity and access. Bachelor's degree holders are half as likely to be unemployed as their peers who only have a high school degree, and they make $1 million in additional earnings on average over their lifetime. You heard that? 1 million. So, what we've done in Rhode Island is offer, as I said, a pathway to a college degree and teaching credential in less than 3 years. We're in partnership with College Unbound, which is an alternative higher education university, accredited university, and we identify high potential support professionals in the field. They are committed. They're from the community. More often than not, they are diverse both ethnically and linguistically. And so in our partnership, we have been able to recruit and retain individuals in our program because we're meeting them where they are, right? We are thinking about their lived experiences. We are thinking about how their lived experiences show up, and we actually give them credit for that. In the program with College Unbound, they actually utilize something called learning in public. So we literally, your years of experience in the field get college credit, right? And so again, meeting folks where they are. We provide them with a network of support. One of our programs at the Equity Institute is called Regeneration. It's a little similar to what Devin is doing, but what we do is we bring educators of color together to support as a support network. Now this is a community initiative centering people, but our students in our program, actually, it's part of their expectation to attend this. You need to network. Building your professional learning network is a priority. If we are not thinking about the mentoring needs of our educators early, it's like it shows up, right? Because they leave. So again, building this network of support and then ensuring them job placement. I specifically am a partnership manager, so I'm working with the districts and the higher ed institutions that are outside of us, because we're only giving them their bachelor's degree, right? We currently are waiting for approval for an educator preparation through the state of Rhode Island Department of Education, but until then, we can't miss that. We still gotta get them through, right? So working in partnership with other higher ed institutions in the state of Rhode Island and the districts to ensure that their certification and job guarantee happens. We're talking about shortages constantly, but we have folks who are clearly capable of being in those spaces. And so our pathway is very clear. We help them get their bachelor's degree, they pursue graduate levels coursework. More often than not, they're then obtaining their master's degree for their licensure, right? So the pay increase actually is significantly better too, because even with your bachelor's degree, the unions and their contracts, you often will already get a raise just by having that. Whether you go under an emergency certification or stay in your para role. So we've already created the advancement, right, in that growth. They attain their teacher certification, we help them with that job placement, but most importantly, they receive ongoing support from us at the Equity Institute. And again, this is really thinking about that mentorship role, and how do we really think about what that means in centering community. We know post-pandemic, well, I don't know if it's really post, but post-school closures, we had a lot of teachers leave the field for different reasons, right? It was a challenging time for many. They were frontline workers, and the paraprofessionals were relied on more heavily than ever, right? Or support professionals in our schools. And the reality is if we are not centering the why now, we're going to continue to have those challenges. So reason one of why now is that national data shows teachers left the field in large numbers as a result of the pandemic. But there are still significant teacher vacancies, and we need to fill those, and we need to fill them with qualified and compassionate and prepared educators. We know special education, which is my passion, is also representative of an over-representation of students of color, right? So when we think about the educators of color that we can advance, because paras typically are in special education classrooms, then we can, in fact, increase the representation for our learners of color who, again, hope to aspire to be educators one day. Research confirms that when taught by a teacher of color, students of color experience higher reading and math test scores, higher graduation rates, decreased dropout and discipline rates, and increased enrollment in advanced courses. So one thing that people don't talk about when we talk about special education is gifted education. Our Black babies are brilliant. And they often don't end up in gifted classes. But gifted education is part of special education. So if we are thinking about how we are supporting our learners and advancing them, and thinking about the individual needs of our learners, that needs to be a priority too. So our pilot cohort, I had the privilege of being part of the first cohort. I'm still teaching in our program, and the majority of our TA to BA participants are in PK6 public schools, specifically Providence, Pawtucket, Warwick, and Central Falls. They're all members of a union in Rhode Island, including MEA and UFT. And the General Workers Union. But I say that because those contracts are different, right? And so how people kind of have to navigate the system within their districts varies. But the TA2BA, our program, is working with the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers to ensure that there is this seamless placement of TAs into full teaching roles. And again, when we think about what the districts need and want and say, and then what the union contracts say and need and want, they can be conflicting at times. But again, I think the most important thing to highlight here is that 100% of our fellows identifies people of color. The gender is still, we're still working on getting the men of color in the door, but we have a few, but primarily they are women of color. And there's a wide range, age range from, in 20s, 30s, all the way to 60, actually. And their experience ranges, again, from like 3 to 23 years. At this point, I think it's like 25, as I said. But that's an important piece to highlight because that means they have investment. They have investment in not just the school, their community, but the growth of themselves, the advocacy that they are portraying for themselves, as well as for the young leaders that they serve every single day. I also had the pleasure of sitting on the Rhode Island Senior State Leadership Team. We are, there's a Connecticut Cedar too. I don't know how active, I'm in Rhode Island, so I don't know how active the Connecticut Cedar is. But it's something that folks should really think about being a part of if they're not. Cedar's mission is to support students with disabilities in achieving college and career-ready standards by building the capacity of state personnel, preparation systems to prepare teachers and learners to implement evidence-based practices within multi-tiered systems of support. So me being on Cedar, actually I was on it as an undergrad while I was still in college. My research mentor recommended me, and that mentorship has led me to continue to do this good work. And the two things that I'll say about this are that there is directly in alignment with the work that we're doing at the Equity Institute, and we're really thinking about the support for teacher recruitment, retention, and workforce diversification through working with the state education agency, the local education agency, and the EdPrep programs, right? So there's it's a full circle plan that everybody is committed to, and again, collaboration is so important. The earlier work we did was we focused a lot on some literacy tools and the agreements and work in partnership with all the agencies, because that's a job all on its own, and really thinking about equity and access. But right now, as we move into a new leg of our work, we're really thinking about that data piece, right? And so I really appreciate that you're bringing this to the forefront, because by highlighting the data, it gives folks both that mixed methods approach is key. We have to tell the story, but we have to show the data, because that's how we can move mountains together. Lastly, I just want to play a video. She is a recent graduate, actually. She just graduated this summer. Her name is Alicia Dos. She is actually the 60-year-old that I was talking about, so she just graduated. So let's see if this works. You know what? Hold on. It's important that y'all see this. Hope there's no ad. It's from the Providence Journal.
From shipping doctor to garage classroom, warehouse associate to robotics apprentice, entry level to software engineer. At Amazon, there's no way out for anyone, because there's something for everyone.
Amazon pays 100% of my tuition, so now I'm on my way to get my bachelor's degree, and it's pretty awesome.
Prepaid tuition.
Well, Amazon parents is doing stuff too.
I've been a TA here for 16 years in the school center, and in the special ed, I work with special ed. So for the past 5 years, my teacher been out sick. She passed away in July. She was too young, 66. She was 66. Throughout these 5 years, I've been dealing with substitute teacher. They come, I think they don't like it, they go, and in a year I get sometimes 5. So I think I was the only consistent person that these kids had, bringing them to graduation and everything, and being a bilingual, trilingual. I speak 5 languages, and I'm diverted, speak Portuguese, Creole. I speak, read and write French very well, and here I am with the English. So I welcome everybody that comes here. They come to me. You should see my door, the hallway next to me, full of kids that come to this classroom. I have to throw them out because we don't belong here in this area. So they love me here. They love me, and I love them back more than that. I come here every day with a smile on my face, and as I told Linda, I live by this quote, do what you love and you will never work a day in your life. That's how I feel. I am here giving back. I came as an immigrant, as most of them in this school come from the Dominican Republic, all those Spanish, and now we are receiving a bunch of Syrians. They are here, immigrants, that will help with the language, and this is my passion. Definitely, I will change it in out of me every day with a smile on my face, dress help, I don't feel I'm working. I come and go, and everybody here was, I just finished, I started as a TA, and I didn't have my bachelor. The pandemic started, came out an opportunity to go to school. The Providence schools was paying for that tuition. I'm 58 years old. I feel that I said, I'm going to school. And I was waiting for this opportunity to, I couldn't afford it. I had to pay for college, and my kids were grown up. And as soon as that opportunity came up, I said, this is a dream come true. I'm hopping in, and I grabbed it with all that I could, and taking 4 classes at a time. I am here as a teacher, and everyone was happy, been happy for me to get this position. I'm teaching. All the kids are excited. Miss Ligia, you made it. Miss Ligia, you made it. What changed is because I can advocate for these kids in another level. Because as a TA, I didn't have much power. But right now, my mission here and my thing is these kids, the students, immigrants. I am an immigrant. I know the struggle, and I am right here in a position that was not here 32 years ago. I call this home. I said home, and it's just because I'm away from home. But this is when I come here, the love that I give and I receive. I don't feel I'm loving.
Really, what I also want to share, there's one additional highlight about Ligia. She just got Teacher of the Month this month at her school, and she is, it's like she's going through this process, and then she gets recognized, and she's like, yesterday, I saw her the other day, we had the she's like, it's Black History Month, I got recognized as Teacher of the Month, I've only been doing this for a few months, I'm so happy, I'm so proud. And I think the thing that she said so eloquently is that there's love there, right? She loves her students, they love her back. As she says, she tried to get them out. She has to tell them to go somewhere else. They're not supposed to be there that period. And I think that is really the essence of what the program is about. It's about centering care and community. And so I'm looking forward to continuing to do this work and supporting whoever else is doing it, because things move together, right? So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayana. Oh my goodness, what a wonderful way to end the presentation and to see that video. One of the things that really stood out for me as you were talking about the program was thinking about historically included and excluded groups and how some of the structures around access and getting these certifications and even knowing what that process is are part of the barriers. And just loving this idea of college credit for lived experience, right? And honoring the lived experience and the diverse lived experience as data, as research, as valuable, and as important to be able to be in a position to be able to create these spaces of belonging for all students. So thank you. Our time is short, but I wanted to ask each panel member just one question, and then we'll move it on to the legislative panel. But if there was one thing that you wanted folks in this room to remember about your presentation, they forgot everything else you just said, and it was just one thing you wanted them to remember, what would that one thing be?
Start, I'll kick it off. I just want everyone to remember that the focus needs to not just be on the recruitment, but also the retention. We can recruit as many educators as we want of color, but if they leave because of inadequate working conditions, because they're emotionally drained, traumatized, all of our efforts are futile. So we talk about teaching to the whole child. I want us to also be concerned with caring for the whole person as it relates to teachers. And how do we check back with our diverse teachers, not just racially diverse, but linguistically diverse? And how do we continue to collect this qualitative data and elevate their voices? Often we make decisions about recruitment without hearing directly from the source. So continuing to uplift the current educators.
Okay, if I had to say one thing that I hope you remember is that navigating the teacher certification process is hard. And we have to do better. We have to make it accessible. Our Department of Ed websites are hard to navigate. The process is not easy to understand. And, you know, we are all doing work collectively to make change for that. I believe in that. Because guess who builds the websites? Right, so we have to think more innovatively and creatively about how we're presenting information, how we're helping the information be accessible, and then the process itself. Because if people are turned away from that interest of following through, they're never going to make it to the classroom in the ways that we hope they will.
I'm gonna cheat, and this was not something I'm reinforcing of what I said because I think folks have already captured the data collection piece. I want to focus on specifically early career educators of color. We have to think differently about expertise and how we define expertise. We also need to think differently about how we think about collaboration. Until our schools accurately mirror the diversity of our student populations, then we need to create coalitions and supports beyond our school buildings in support of early career educators of color. So how do we lean on more experts, and I'm saying veteran educators of color who continue to choose this profession from outside of our school buildings to support the early career educators of color so that we get across that threshold of what we call the year 4 fall off. We're seeing educators of color leaving right before year 4, before tenure, before all of these things that will keep us in the profession. So how do we expand how we define expertise? How do we expand coalition and ecosystem development beyond our school buildings, specifically in support of early career educators of color?
I'm glad you said that because that's exactly what I think I kind of would have needed. I think adding to my experience, there were only 2 other educators of color in my school, and one was hired at the same time I was. And just the coalition building that you're talking about, being able to, you know, during my lunch hour, go to a classroom who, you know, was a veteran teacher of color, could have transformed my experience in navigating all the pieces. So thank you for saying that. And then to, I guess, answer the question, the classroom isn't an island. I think there are a lot of, you know, pathways and drivers that come into the classroom that affect not only our students, but also our educators and how they show up. And I think if we use some of the tools that I learned about today, I think it helps paint the picture a little bit better about what are the things that we do need to tackle across the states. So.
Thank you, Neil, Saida, Devin, and Ayana. We could be here all day, couldn't we? We could be here all day, but I just thank you for your brilliance and the work that you're doing, and I'm going to hand it off now.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for that. Next, I'd like to welcome our esteemed panel of legislators. You know, so I want to welcome you. Firstly, we have Representative Bobby Gibson, I see you. Representative Miriam Khan, I see you. And Representative Robin Porter. I also want to welcome other legislators who joined us here. I see Representative Baumgartner. I know that there were several others who were here. So, so welcome to all of you. That's right. So if we could, we'd love to have your reflections on what you've heard today. I know that Welcome.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate you giving us this opportunity to listen and to learn and to take back some of what we've heard today. And as I'm reading your bios and I'm going forward again, to actually really reflect. So yes, I am an educator. I'm a vice principal in Louisville, and I've been an educator for about 30 years. And in everything that we spoke about and heard about, especially with diversifying the educator workforce, is true. And it's a problem that we really need to put some dollars behind and some creativity behind to solve. In all my years, I've been teaching. I've been in different schools. I've been in inner city schools. I've been specialty schools, crèche schools. And what you will see is day in and day out. The honest truth is you'll see white women who are teachers. And we all know that, there's nothing bad about that. But our kids are very diverse. The world is getting small, especially with technology. And to see the same type of teachers day in, day out is a travesty to our students. Our students deserve more and need more. So thank you for this. I'm going to pass the ball on, but I'd like to maybe make another comment later to see how our conversation goes.
Hello, thank you. So I also work as a special education teacher, so I was very happy to see you and hear you. I want to say thank you to your commission first for putting this together. Steve, Denise, you guys I don't know how you brought together such a dynamic group of people and packed them into one afternoon. So it's amazing. I've been to a lot of, especially before, and legislator events around teacher recruitment or teacher diversity. And what I often find missing is the part about keeping teachers. We always talk about, how can we hire more teachers? And I'm like, guys, we're leaving because it's not that great right now, right? So it was really powerful to hear people speak to that, and I'm really taking back a lot of information even for myself. One of the things that I would notice, and a lot of my friends who are teachers of color will also notice, is when you go to some of these job fairs, and this is in our state, for teachers that are looking for employment, majority of them are teachers of color. But then the school districts will say, teachers of color don't exist. So that's not true, right? Because we're there. The data point about how much faster teachers of color leave. And often it is, sometimes it might go to another district that might be more supportive, but I think it's important that our focus be around that diversity. But then the other piece that I really appreciated is, is the recognition that districts have to really change how our systems are built. Because what I often find is, people want diversity, right? They'll say we want diverse people, but then they don't want the diverse opinions or the diverse voices, and that's not okay. So even just here at this table, you've had people from, a range of voices and a range of opinions, and that's what's beautiful, because that's what brings reality to the table. So I think that is a big piece of it, that people don't want that. And I think that often is what drives teachers of color out, because we use that voice and we'll speak up and say, hey, I know how to do this better. Or we see, that's not what we want you here, So I think it's very important to really acknowledge how systemically the systems are kind of built to keep teacher voices out of the conversation, but then there's no diverse teacher voices not part of the picture. So I really, really appreciate this conversation and why, having everybody here. The one other thing I want to uplift is you also spoke to, Ayana, you also spoke to your program, which I'm listening to, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so much. So for the legislators that are in the room, there is a proposed bill this session for paraeducator to teacher pathway. And very similar reasons, everything you were saying. We don't really have teacher assistant positions in most of our districts here in Connecticut, but we do have classroom paras and paras that work in special education, and we have a huge shortage in special education. So that is one of the things that hopefully that's something, we'll work on this term, but I really appreciate, just this being here and having this conversation, so thank you.
Two things you validated for me right out the gate. The people closest to the problems are closest to the solutions, but oftentimes furthest from the power. So as elected officials in this building, I feel it is our responsibility to take the power we have to empower the people who put us here.
Amen.
And then the other thing was, representation matters. It matters, I started here in 2014, and, in that year, there was, reports and data that said the public schools hit a majority milestone with Latino, African American, and Asian students surpassing the number of white students. And it is being predicted in 2044 that the trend will be majority, minority across the board. So that means that we will continue to see this trend in our classrooms. And I'm proud to say, as we were watching all of this, and we were looking at the barriers, right, what the problems are, between the years of 2018 and 20, Connecticut has actually come up with some solutions. And some of those solutions address the scholarship, where we're actually requiring SD to administer a new minority teacher candidate scholarship program. And it authorizes grants up to $20,000 a year for high school graduates of priority school districts, which are the 10 lowest performing districts in the state of Connecticut who are enrolled in a teacher prep program at any four-year institution of higher education, because we understand we need some folks from them HBCUs to come on this way too, right? And we need to incentivize them. We address reciprocity, right? And in that, it allows educators from Maine to Virginia to be certified in Connecticut if they hold a teaching certificate in any of these states, and they include Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, DC, Virginia, and we can't forget Puerto Rico. So, yes, and then we have training video, and this legislation actually requires that SDE, in consultation with two other groups here in Connecticut, develop an implicit bias video training module for school district personnel who hire teachers, right? That's very important. We can't get in the gate because of who is at the gate, who the gatekeepers are. So I'm proud to say that that was actually something that was done and has been in effect since July 1, 2022. And then any Board of Ed employee who is involved in or responsible for hiring teachers must complete this training as well. And the last thing I'll say is that we did look at residency, and it is a candidate certification, retention, or residency year program for teacher certification candidates that requires each alliance district to partner with the residency program operator to enroll minority teachers, minority candidates. So additionally, it requires SDE to withhold from each alliance district 10% of any increase in alliance aid, and use the funds for grants to cover costs that are related to the residency program, because it says, the good Representative Gibson said, we gotta put our money where our mouth is. We've been doing this for years. I would even dare eventually say decades. And lip service is one thing, and it's needed, but it's time for the foot service. It's time for us, we've been talking the talk, it's time to walk the walk and really put our money where our mouth is. And, the thing that I would close with is this: a lot of people say, well, why is it important? And it's been stated, and it is not just important for the children that look like us. I think it's equally, if not more so important, for the children that don't look like us. And it's because students become more empathetic. When you grow up in a bubble, and all you see is people that look like you, and then you accidentally or incidentally run into other folks that don't look like you, don't share your culture, your lived experience, you're teaching children how to be prejudiced, whether it's, conscious or subconscious, whether it's learned or taught. And we have to admit that some of this is actually taught. So we give them two lenses to look through, right? You have right and you have wrong. Now you can engage and start using your own mental skills to decide what you need to do as an individual in certain situations. Students become, they gain a better understanding of lessons and people, right? Why we do what we do, why we talk like we talk, why we dress like we dress, why we eat what we eat, you know? So it expands the knowledge base, and it expands socialization beyond, you know, what you used to. You know, every now and then it's good to do something different, right? And to be around some folks that are different. Students become more open-minded, they feel more confident, right, and safer. And the last thing is they're better qualified and better prepared for a more diverse workforce. We say train them up in the way they should go. This is a diverse world, and it's getting more and more diverse every single year. So we need to make sure that we are training up our children no matter what zip code they come from, so that when they interact and when they intersect, they can support one another in ways that are meaningful and help to expand the possibilities of their future. So thank you again, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. I'll be really brief. But my colleagues here brought up a couple of points that serves to bust in my mind. You talk about majority minority, right, in our students. If you think about all the different types of kids that are in classrooms and what they see every day, just like the African American Puerto Rican history bill we passed a couple of years ago, right? In which, you know, part of that importance was the images that our kids see every day. You know, they get up, turn on TV, most times when the news is going to be a certain type of person, a white person. Go to the movies, most of them going to see white persons. Who runs our country? White person. So, you know, it's about the images that they see, and that's important that they see a diverse population of teachers. And then we talk about keeping the teachers. Well, you know, if the majority of the teachers are of one gender and color, they end up being administrators. These are administrators who run PDs. They evaluate other teachers. So if that's the case, you know, most times you're not going to have teachers of colors. Just play out, you're not an administrator. You're not going to have teachers of color who are going to be successful many times in those types of circumstances. You know, so it's important that, you know, even with that we have administrators of color. We have, and we start pushing them sooner. You know, one of the solutions was going to HBCUs and getting students, which is a great idea. But I think we have to go further down into that. We have to hit the kids when they're younger, get them interested in becoming teachers and learners. But, you know, if they only see one gender, one color of teacher, you know, they're not going to really, you know, be too hot on being an educator, being a teacher. So we have to open up our minds, we have to open up our pocketbooks, right? Representative Porter, and we have to make sure we understand how important this actually is.
I just want to say personal thank you for introducing us to Ligia, because, you know, I think Ligia's story really underscores the foundational question here, which is, you know, this didn't happen on accident. We built a system that purposefully excluded Black and Indigenous people of color from sitting in front of children and teaching them. It was built that way. It needs to be unbuilt, right? Because I will not live in your home if there's still evidence of my entrance in the side or in the back. I will not live in your home if there is still evidence of your exclusion written on your walls and evidence in your floors of being built on my back. So I want to thank all of you for helping us reimagine how to tear down those walls and build those together that include us, are representative of us, and are led by us. So thank you all so much.